I want to just pull up a slide that will remind you that we are here for a conversation on soil and spirit, cultivating connections between faith and gardening. And Hope for Creation has been hosting a monthly event that's designed to support the creation and nurturing of green teams in congregations every month now since September. And so this is our April Green Team event. We're very excited to have you here with us today as we learn from folks who have been engaged in community and congregational gardening here in the Kalamazoo area. I thought it might be appropriate to start with just a little reflection for Earth Day. This actually comes from the Catholic Health Association. It's their 2021 Earth Day prayer. And I will just read it. God, creator of all, we offer in gratitude and humility. We offer our prayer. I'm sorry, I have to move the person. Let me try again. God, creator of all, we offer our prayer in gratitude and humility that we might heed your call to care for one another through our care of the least, the lowest, and the most vulnerable of all your blessed creation. Grant, we pray, the courage to speak on behalf of the soft soil under our feet, the running and still waters, the warmth of the sun on our face, and all the crawling, flying, and swimming creatures you love. May our courage to speak translate into actions that protect our planet, so that our children and their children might enjoy the fruits of what we sow. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So, Hope for Creation is an interfaith alliance of individuals and congregations who are committed to caring for the planet and the people on it. We are part of the statewide organization, Michigan Interfaith Power and Light, and we are thrilled to be with you today to have this conversation about soil and spirit. We have 4 speakers who will share their experiences with different gardens, different congregations around town. Carol Pratt, who will talk about Hope Garden. Eileen Best, who will talk about Westminster Presbyterian Church's garden. Mark Klein from Prince of Peace Lutheran Church and their Jubilee Garden. And Rochelle Yeaman, who is here representing the Growing Community Garden. That's a collaboration between Sunnyside United Methodist Church and Freshfire AME Church. We're very grateful to each of these folks for being willing to share their stories today. One of our presenters has some slides that we'll put up when it's his turn to speak, but we've asked all 4 of our speakers today to consider these questions. And what we're going to have them do is each speak for about 10 minutes about their garden and their experiences, and they'll weave into their presentation answers to these questions. How does your faith connect to growing food? Why is it important to care for the soil? And what advice do you have for congregations seeking to engage in community gardening projects? So, with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will hear first, I believe, from Carol Pratt. So, Carol, please take it away.
Hi, sorry I was late coming on. I actually wrote something, so I'll be reading it and interjecting things. Our church garden began, this is on Q Avenue, about 2014, because we had acreage at that site and it had been purchased to build a church on. We were slowly building our congregation, and at no time did we ever build a church there. In 2015, Pine Island Church walked through a discernment process to better understand who we were and what we could do as a faith community. Thus, our Q Avenue property was used. We had a garden there. We expanded it and named it Pine Island Hope Garden. Our goal was manifold. First, it was to grow vegetables to feed the underserved in the greater Kalamazoo County. With 1 out of 5 residents going to bed hungry, we thought we could make an important food contribution. To bring the community into our garden experience was our second goal. We did have a small number of community helpers, and on Fridays, when we were harvesting our vegetables, we had a roadside stand open to all and only for contributions. Third, it was our hope to enrich the lives of our gardeners by sharing our talents, personal time, and stories. We were led by, and continue to be led by, our wonderful master gardener, Bob Poole. I know everyone who helped till, plant, weed, harvest, and put the garden to bed learned a lot. We learned a lot. One year we had Vesper services on Wednesday evenings in the garden area. In 2019, we applied for and received a grant from the Harold and Grace Upjohn Foundation to fund a paid intern. This enabled us to give our intern, 1, a positive work environment, 2, an experience of learning gardening techniques, and 3, to help cultivate and harvest our crops. Our intern was identified as a member of Ministry with Community, and it really was a wonderful, nurturing experience for everyone involved. Now, I will say that our just shy of an acre produced well over 3,000, really 3,000 to 4,000 pounds of produce, and our selections included green beans, green peppers, cucumbers, tomatoes, cabbage, potatoes, eggplants, zucchini, green beans, winter squash varieties such as buttercup, butternut, and cushaw, watermelons, and asparagus. And these harvested produce were brought over to Ministry with Community and Kalamazoo Loaves and Fishes. And at Ministry with Community, their kitchen used our produce, and so did our food pantry. Now, going to the questions that were asked, who funded, or here are questions you might ask, who funded our garden effort? Really, it was helped a great deal by the Presbytery of Lake Michigan, First Presbyterian Church, and our own church members. Another question, how does growing food connect with our faith? That's really the easiest of answers. Helping others, number 1. Providing food to the people in need in the greater Kalamazoo area. Sharing life experiences. And tending the garden while sharing those experiences was really heartwarming, because digging the earth and being with the earth. Also providing a place where the multi-Presbyterian Church youth group shared a meal and came on our property, and it was where food and faith grow. The importance of sharing the soil is utmost in our minds, because without healthy soil, crops, trees, forests, jungles, grassland, and I can't figure out what the word I wrote. We really can't exist. It's the air we breathe and a healthy interdependence. Okay, going to the real questions. Advice, this is the last question. Advice for congregations to engage the community with our gardens. That's really a tough one. It's pretty easy engaging able-bodied, interested members of our congregation. That's the number 1 group. Moving into the community, that takes some effort. We've asked our church members to contact local friends and family. And then branching out from there, family and friends could ask their friends, which did happen. We also placed signs in appropriately visible places. And really the only place that made sense was right near our garden. And actually a couple who stopped to pick up produce on Friday, one Friday, actually came back several times and helped us to work the garden. And of course, harvesting crops could be shared with our volunteers, and they could be shared with other people and their friends and family as well. So, we continue to work. We have about 17 volunteers working at any year, and also some 6 to 10 non-church members would be helping us as well. So welcome to the Hope Garden.
Thank you very much, Carol. That was a great introduction to the work that you are doing there. Next up is Eileen Best.
Hi, everybody. We have a garden at Westminster Presbyterian Church, which is in Portage, kind of across the street from the airport. And Westminster has been blessed with a fairly large plot of land. We've had many discussions about how we should care for that land. About 5 or 6 years ago, we decided to start a small vegetable garden. My husband and I love to garden, so it kind of became our project. We share the produce with church members on Sunday mornings, and there's an open invitation for anyone to pick whatever they would like to pick anytime they'd like to. Many of our members are older and once had their own gardens, but are no longer able to care for one, so they really appreciate the veggies. I once received a handwritten thank you note for tomatoes, which was really delightful. This year we decided to expand our garden a bit. We put up a new, sturdier fence, and we're putting in a composting system. We hope to reach out to neighbors and make our vegetables available to them also. The questions, first one is, how does your faith connect with growing food? I think that God calls us to care for the land. In the Hebrew scriptures, in Genesis 2:15, God puts the humans in the Garden of Eden to till it and to keep it. A better translation of those words is to serve and preserve the land. So literally, the first job that God gave humans was to take care of the land. Unfortunately, we aren't doing a very good job of it. But at Westminster, we decided to try to take care of our little piece of land the best way that we could. Helping the land to feed people is so satisfying and a deeply spiritual activity. It's really ministry. Why is it important to care for the soil? Good soil is alive with all kinds of living organisms. When soil has a lot of organic matter in it that is breaking down and composting, lots of nutrients are available to the plants for healthy growth. There has to be nutrients in the soil for there to be nutrients in the food that is grown. Industrial agriculture, which is how most of our food is grown, does nothing to replenish the soil. It dumps basically 3 chemicals on the land, but none of the magic of truly alive soil is there to nourish the plants. So most of our food is not really very nutritious. In our Westminster garden, we try our best to give back to the soil by adding lots of composted material. Advice that I have for those seeking to engage in community projects: first of all, start small. There's always room to grow. Gardening does take a lot of work, so be sure you have enough people who are really willing to do the work. It's important to engage the community from the beginning and get their support and enthusiasm. It's a great activity for involving kids and just a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. Next up is Mark. And Mark, you tell me when you want me to put up slides, and I will gladly do that.
Sure. Go ahead and put up the first slide.
Okay. How's that?
Perfect. So I'm Mark Klein. I'm a member of Prince of Peace Lutheran Church, which is located on West Milham between Westnedge and Oakland, but pretty close to Oakland Drive. Our Jubilee Garden is an approved Master Gardener project, which just means that we can get credit for working hours on that. And we raise fresh produce for those in need. Mostly we take it to Loaves and Fishes, but we also sometimes take it to other food pantries and to Ministry as Community. Go ahead with the next slide. A friend of mine once told me it would be more effective to give Loaves and Fishes a dollar amount instead of working a garden. Loaves and Fishes can use their discounts as a charity to gather more food per dollar than we can produce as amateur farmers. This may be true, but what does not factor into that is the enjoyment of gardening that we have and the visibility to others who might say, if we can do this, if Prince of Peace can do this, we might be able to do this too. Visibility also occurs within our church, where other members may see this as a worthwhile cause and want to help us out. This is a picture of some of the produce that we take to Loaves and Fishes. Next slide. Care for the soil is also faith connected. We are stewards of God on this planet, tasked with keeping the planet healthy. Care for the soil can come in many forms. One is to use the correct amount of fertilizer. Too much fertilizer can run off into the water systems with negative effects, like unwanted algae blooms in water receptacles. Proper tilling also has an effect on the soil. Too much tilling or tilling when the soil is too wet can cause compaction. Compaction means that the soil particles are too close together to allow air or water to move through it. If water cannot move through the soil, it can become stagnant, which is not good for the soil. Compaction also does not allow roots of plants to push through it, decreasing the soil's ability to sustain life. At the Jubilee Garden, we only till the soil once a year and use other measures to keep the weeds under control. When considering a new garden, some pre-planning is important. Find out how much interest there is in helping with the garden preparation and the day-to-day operations. I would recommend starting small, as we have found many volunteers have their hearts set on helping, but other priorities or a lack of understanding of how much work is required to maintain a garden reduces their ability to help out. Our current plot, shown here, is about 35 feet by 100 feet. We have an automated sprinkler to take care of the watering, an electric fence to keep out non-human foragers, and a ground cloth for most of the garden, which is not shown here yet, to provide a better weed barrier. Even with all this, I work about 5 hours a week throughout the entire season, which is April through October. I would estimate I have other volunteers who contribute a total of 5 to 10 hours each week, mostly with planting and harvesting and some of the weeding. Next slide. If you don't have automated watering and a weed barrier, hours would increase. And before we used a weed barrier, we basically did not keep up with the weeds, and that took its toll on how much produce was produced, because weeds will crowd out your produce plants very quickly. Even with a weed barrier, some weeding is required around the individual plants. The weed barrier can be expensive, but we started with newsprint, which was collected, which may become more scarce and scarce as people no longer buy newspapers, but we put newsprint down and then covered it with straw to keep it from blowing away. And that's what this picture shows. Another possibility is if you have mulch, and that can be used to put around the plants, maybe 2 or 3 inches deep, and that will keep the weeds at bay. We know at the Master Gardener Garden, which I also work at, they have a source of mulch from the city of Portage, I believe, which really helps them in keeping their weeds down. In the Master Gardener class, I learned the 3 most important things when planting a plant are location, location, and location. Location influences the amount of sunlight, the moisture in the soil type, weather patterns, and temperature. Attributes about a location can be changed, but that usually takes a lot of work or cost. Things like tree and shrub removal, raised beds, greenhouses, grow lights, watering systems, fertilizer, and compost can change the attributes of the growing site. Most garden plants require full sun for the majority of the day. Our Jubilee garden has a row of trees that partially shade the east end of our garden in the morning. We noticed that the plants do not grow as well at that end of the garden, so we decided to move the tomatoes to the other end of the garden because tomatoes take a lot of sun. Check the description of your plants you want to use and match the requirements to your garden location. Another concern is that, do you have access to a water source? Unfortunately, weather is not predictable, and most garden plants do best with an inch of water every week. This can also vary by soil type. If you have sandy soil, the water runs through very quickly and you'll need to water more frequently. If you have more of a clayey soil, then the water will stick within that soil for a longer period of time. And in fact, you don't want to water a whole inch of water at one time because it may get stuck on top of the soil, not drain through. When there's a stretch of days without rain, plants will start to wilt if they're not watered. Water can get very heavy if you try to haul it from a source that's not close to the garden, so you need to keep that in mind. In addition to trees reducing the sunlight getting to the ground, in the surrounding areas, trees will also soak up water as it comes onto your site. So if you have trees in the area, they're going to pull the water out of the soil, and you probably will need more than an inch of water per week. Next slide. Soil preparation is important for starting a new garden. At the Jubilee Garden's current site, a lot of work was required to remove the prairie grass and small trees from the new location. Even if you're only removing grass sod, it can take a lot of work if done by hand. Alternate methods for growing produce, which take less prep work, are container gardening or raised beds. These types of gardens, you control the attributes of the soil by putting the soil into it, not relying on what soil is in the ground. The raised beds showed here were built as handicap accessible. They're about 3 feet high, so somebody, if they wanted to, could come in with a wheelchair and do some gardening work. On the other hand, even though this is, you control the soil, there are some downsides to container or raised bed gardening. The surface area of the soil exposed to air is much greater, and that causes a higher evaporation, so watering needs to be done more frequently. Also, since the soil is raised up above the ground, and usually you have a barrier at the bottom of the raised bed, the water cannot be pulled up from the ground as easily. Once you have your land cleared for your garden, I would recommend getting a soil test done to determine what nutrients are especially needed for your garden location. We did a soil analysis at the Prince of Peace Jubilee Garden a few years ago and found we had typical Michigan soil. That is, it had high levels of phosphorus and low levels of potassium. There isn't much you can do about the high phosphorus except not putting more into it. So most fertilizers in Michigan are usually at 0 or very low phosphorus, and that is good. We did spread some potash down to try to help the potassium level. It's hard to really tell other than taking a new soil test whether you've changed very much. Some years we take horse manure from a stable that allows us to haul their manure away. We spread it on the garden in the fall and let it sit all winter before we till it into the ground. We also put fertilizer around the plants when we plant them in the spring. If you're interested in a soil test, any master gardener should be able to help you out with getting a soil test kit from the Michigan State Extension. Another consideration is the type of gardening you're planting. We grow vegetables that go mostly to loaves and fishes. Other garden plans include flower gardens for beauty and possibly a meditation garden. Community gardens with separate plots for each gardener is another option. Our investigation into converting to a community garden approach found that it would be more effort than our small band of volunteers were willing to commit to. When talking to the community members that were interested in this approach, we found that we would need to provide tools, transportation, childcare, and in addition, we would have to have somebody on site to handle disputes. Your community may not have the same requirements as ours did. So if you're planning on a community garden, it is good to communicate with that group to find out what their needs are. Next slide. Garden planning is not exclusively about plants. You also need to think about pest management. How much of your produce are you willing to lose to pests, either eating them completely or just taking a bite out of each one to see which ones they like? Each crop has its own set of pests to worry about. At the Jubilee Garden, we have a 6-foot fence with an electric wire at the top encircling the garden. We also have 18 inches of old fencing buried around the entire garden. The buried fence keeps out the rabbits and the groundhogs. The electric wire, even though it's 6 feet high, seems to keep out the deer and the groundhogs. I did not know groundhogs could climb 6-foot fences until I saw it happen, but they can. And the groundhog likes to eat a lot when they're in the garden. So it was very good to keep them out. I later learned a different solution for keeping groundhogs out, and that is when you put up your fence, do not put the poles all the way to the top of the fence. If you leave maybe a foot or so unattached, when the groundhog tries to climb it, it may flop over. I think this might only work temporarily because if it flops over, it'll eventually permanently be that way. This slide shows our solar electric fence controller. So it's a battery connected to a small solar panel that we have attached to our watering cabinet. And that pulses an electric pulse through the electric wire on the fence every few seconds. And that seems to keep the critters out. Next slide. Although I've talked about a lot of problems in the garden, I don't want you to think that it's so much problem that you're not going to get anything done. We find gardening very rewarding at Prince of Peace, and even with all these problems, we often produce about 1,000 pounds of produce to take to loaves and fishes. And I think even though there are challenges, each problem is a challenge that can be overcome if you have the right knowledge and the right tools. I'll turn it back to Joan now.
Thank you very much, Mark. I loved being able to see what you were talking about. So thanks for that. Next up is Rochelle.
Hi, everyone. Joan, do you mind putting up the questions again? It's a good visual for me, a good keep me on track kind of a thing. I also have notes, so. Anyway, hi everyone. Can y'all hear me well? Okay, great. I'm Rochelle, and I am co-manager of the Growing Community Garden, which, as Jonas said, is a collaboration between Fresh Fire AME and Sunnyside United Methodist. I'm discovering that most people are aware of our garden because it's on Gull Road and it's very visible. That's actually how I got involved with it as well. I saw this cool garden. I lived up there's some apartments across the street from Meyer up on Gull Road. I lived there for a few years. So every day back and forth to work, I would see the garden, and each season it got bigger, and it was just really exciting. So I started to get curious. Anyway, in my day job, I'm also the operations manager for an organization called E-Race. We do anti-racism training. I know a few folks on this call have been in our trainings. And those two things coming together will make a little sense as I go on. So for me, I always say my mom grew up Catholic, my dad grew up Protestant, I grew up confused, and I mostly grew up in the United Methodist Church. At the same time, my relationship with organized Christianity is complicated because of just things I've seen in the church happen, and so I walked away for a while. I'm in the process of coming back. It's a very complicated process for me. But I can say that my relationship with the land, with the soil, with the plants that we eat is deeply spiritual. I believe that the food that we eat, for me, is a type of communion, not of the body and blood of Christ, but of the love and abundance of God's creation. And so I tend to look at it, and while I am not going to pretend I eat perfectly organic or grow my own food or anything even close to that, I still live in this society. I do think, though, if I'm going to be in relationship with the land, if I'm going to be in relationship with this earth that literally makes me be, with the air that I breathe, with the food that I eat, with the water that I drink. How do I do that in ways that, I fear that our food is too often just drenched in fossil fuels and human exploitation and exploitation of the land. And so, how do we engage in our eating in ways that um, our connection in a way that where we dance with the land instead of trying to dominate it, and that's really vital for me. And so part of that as well, at Growing Community Garden. So I said we have this partnership between Sunnyside and Fresh Fire. Fresh Fire is a historically Black church, and Sunnyside is a historically white church. And so we are living into an anti-racist relationship, or trying to, because it can be complicated. So the reason we have co-managers is that I am the white manager from Sunnyside, and then John Hampton, Pastor Hampton's husband, is the um, manager of color from Fresh Fire. And so we're trying to figure out, how do we work together? How do we talk to each other? And how do we have a welcoming face when folks come into our garden? Because we are a foraging garden, which means that while we do take excess produce up to the Loaves and Fishes pantry that Sunnyside also runs, and some things like that, we invite folks from the neighborhood. We're near the East Side neighborhood. We're in Comstock. So we invite folks from the neighborhood to come in and take what they need. And so we're trying to build those relationships, and we find that For a lot of folks, especially the way that we have ideas around like private property and don't trespass and that, we find it's helpful to have someone who maybe looks like them that they can ask questions to and that can invite them in and have it feel really honestly welcoming, which is something that we're always striving to do. So this year we're putting up a 7-foot deer fence for the first time. I'm a little bit concerned about how that'll make everything look cordoned off. So we're gonna have to figure out how to do some communication to folks. We're working on signage and just talking to folks in the community to make sure everyone understands that fencing is for deer, not for people. Um, and so when I talk about anti-racism, to me, I believe that the same um, power dynamics um, that lead us to use tons of herbicides and use all of the fertilizers that cause algae blooms. I think Mark was talking about, and that cause us to just strip the land of everything it has in order to produce the most at the lowest cost. I believe that those power dynamics are the same power dynamics that lead to inequities in our society. And that, so I believe that the two are very closely linked. I believe that our environmental degradation is a manifestation of power dynamics in our society, and that our issues with race and racism are just a different set of manifestations of the same dynamics. So to me, having a garden where we work to make people feel welcome and empowered in the space, generate conversations. I know that was something that I have lost my notes on. But I know that's something that was spoken about earlier. I think Eileen was saying something about the conversations that you have when you're in the garden. So that's a little bit about who we are, why we do what we do, why I do what I do. And to that end, soil, I mean, we walk on the soil, we eat from the soil, we drink from the soil. The soil is us. And so to take care of the soil is to take care of each other and to take care of ourselves in every metaphorical sense, every physical sense, etc. And let me just check my notes a second here. Yeah, so some thoughts about folks who are trying to start a garden. I think a lot of amazing advice has been given so far by Carol, Eileen, and Mark on some of the logistics and also some of the energy needs, just the human energy and community energy. Some notes about the hours that need to get worked, the amount of money it takes. So I would definitely lift all of that up. For me, I find that putting people first is the thing. Um, your volunteers will get burned out. Like you will have cycles of volunteers. You will have years where, with COVID and everything, we found that, half a dozen extra people just showed up. And then we've had years before that where, just trying to get everything watered effectively was just a constant challenge. So understand that there will be a wax and wane to your volunteer base, and to have patience with that the same way you have patience when, yeah, that groundhog did get in and half of your green beans are gone. And I've been thinking a lot lately that I love this time of the year because everything's potential. The deer haven't decimated any crops yet, so everything is perfect and beautiful in my mind. And so that's the season we're in. We're in this season of visioning and hoping and laying down a good foundation for the season, for the growing season, I mean. And so, you know, to me, part of the joy of being in the garden is to be able to step away from our cultural sense of linear time, that everything happens week by week, everything happens in a straight line, and it doesn't matter what's happening. You'd better put in your X number of hours, etc. And I think with a garden, it's really important to remember that, you know, there's seasonality. Uh, Sometimes you can't go out because it's pouring rain. Sometimes, so last year I found, because it was such a dry year, and also it seems to be continuing to be quite dry, um, I didn't get powdery mildew on my squash until very late in the season because we got no water, or we got very little rain. Um, so it was very strange because I got the squash bugs before I got the powdery mildew. So just like, you know, rolling with all of those things and all of those changes, I find to be a fantastic practice in patience, in grace for myself and the garden and my fellow volunteers, um, and also a great practice in, you know, just stepping back and trying to find a rhythm with the world around us. And so I find that to be an excellent meditative practice, an excellent spiritual practice, and it also keeps me from from getting too frustrated um, with deer and moles and you name it. So we are like Mark. I don't want to dwell on the challenges we face because there are many, and you know, we're always trying to find new ways to deal with them. This year, like I said, we're putting up 7-foot fencing. I know that's not going to take care of the groundhog issue. So we'll be working on that. And then how do we organize planting to lower the chances of blight? How do we get the soil ready? How do we, you know, do all of these things? And it's a complicated, organic challenge and joy. Um, and yeah, so that's the growing community garden. I'm I'm done.
Thank you, Rochelle, and all of the panelists. What a great kind of cross section of people who are connected to congregations but are doing the work in somewhat different ways. So I want to make sure that there's time for people to ask questions. So start formulating yours, but I'm going to go first because I had a little extra time to think about it. And I'm mindful that for me, that the spirit piece of gardening, it's like the moment I touch the soil and feel connected to the earth and to my faith, something changes, and that connection feels very tangible. So I want to ask each of you if you would tell a connection story from your garden experience. And it could be a connection between two people who are working in the garden, or a connection between putting the seed in the ground and watching it grow. It could be whatever you want it to be, but I'm just interested in hearing your thoughts about how your garden is actually fostering connections. And whoever wants to go first can do that.
I'll start. Our garden is cared for by really a cross-cultural group. We have several Cameroonian families that help us out in the garden, and they have literally brought seeds in from Cameroon. And so we have their greens growing in part of the garden. So it's really wonderful seeing their practices that they've brought from Africa to us. And it's just, it's really wonderful working with them because they are hard workers. They're wonderful. That's my story.
I think I've already told part of my story of the thank you note for the tomatoes, but on Sunday morning, I put all the produce out on a table and people just pick it up. There's never anything left. And it's just so much fun for me to see people walking around cradling their tomatoes or their green beans or whatever, and to take them home and enjoy them. It really is fun. I think it connects our members of our congregation.
Well, the Jubilee Garden's not officially a forager garden. We have had people from our neighborhood come over and take some of the items from our garden. We don't discourage that, and so that's fine with us. If somebody has a need for it, they definitely can come and take it. And every once in a while, we interrupt them as they're doing that because we're coming to do some work there. But we just start a conversation and let them know they're welcome. If they need something, go ahead and take it. And they're very appreciative of that. So that's making some connections with our community.
Yeah, very similar to that. Sunnyside runs a food pantry on Thursday nights, and then we have a free store open on Tuesday nights, and a few other events as well. This year, I definitely want more folks to be available in the evenings, because what I found last year is that a lot of times on those same evenings that folks came for free store or came for loaves and fishes, they would also come down to the garden. And I remember one evening last year that I was um, Pastor David, who has been working the garden for years, was out of town, and I was trying to get all the green beans picked because I realized it had fallen off of everyone else's radar. And some folks came into the garden and they were kind of looking around, and yeah, it was kind of that thing of like, is it like they saw me and they're sort of that like, is it cool that we're here kind of a thing? So got to talk, and I had this big bag of green beans, so I started just like throwing produce at them, saying, "Here, take this, take that. The collards are good, the tomatoes are good. Please don't take any of the cucumbers right now. That kind of thing." And I really enjoyed that, and am hopeful that once we have, because we're still planting, and we will be planting through May. But once we have some bounty, I hope to be in the garden a couple evenings a week to be able to be present and to have those conversations.
Great. Thank you all for the answer to that question. I am going to invite people to unmute themselves and ask questions now. We have about 5 more minutes before we'll wrap up. So if you have a question for any particular panelist or for the group in general, now's the time. Go ahead and toss it in. It looks like Marty and then... Oops, I'm sorry. Everybody unmuted. And okay, so let's go Marty, Sister Ginny, Dave. How's that?
So my question, I learned a lot today, and I appreciate Mark's addressing like trying to get volunteers from the community. I didn't know that had been tried or was a struggle, but does anyone have ideas, maybe even the whole group, on how to work beyond the relationship of provider and charity receiver, like mentoring program, maybe help. We're near a large complex, I believe it's subsidized, where, maybe help some neighbors develop a co-op, or even just one gardener in the neighborhood being, it might be some money, it might be a grant, maybe this whole group together could be get a grant to provide shovels and tools, so that people can have a little bit more independence, and we can be the resource for the teaching and the knowledge and maybe the tools.
Well, I can jump in here. We did have an intern, and he was paid $12 an hour. And as I said, that was funded externally. And I have to say, grants are very difficult to get for this specific purpose. We applied to, I think, 4 organizations. One said yes. One we didn't even apply for because it was just so difficult to get through the whole process. But paying people to work with us, to learn, to share is a wonderful process, but it's difficult to get the grants. That's where I'm coming from.
I would love to just jump in on there too, because like, yeah, getting grants is difficult. Fundraising is, you know, you'd think I got a break from the garden over the winter, but I did not. I was hustling to fundraise and everything. Um, but I just want to say I love the question of like, how do we shift the perspective from, you know, charity to empowerment? And I don't have a great answer for that. I just want to say that we are trying to work on that ourselves, and that's part of where connecting to our neighborhood is important. And yeah, if you have ideas, I'm very open to them.
Can I raise my comment now?
Yes, Sister Ginny, go.
Really, it's Rachel. I'm interested in whether or not you're finding relationships developing from the members of the 2 congregations that are involved. You know, is the working together in the garden helping to foster positive people relationships between the 2 churches?
Definitely. The working with the Hamptons has been a huge thing for me, as well as a couple of other folks who are on the committee. And then we have the garden team that meets consistently, and then we have a pool of 5 to 8 volunteers, consistent volunteers that kind of just want to know about work days. And so bringing so that's a total of, I would say, 10 to 15 folks. So yes, we've definitely started to form some relationship that way, some trust. And our 2 churches are just, we also partnered to some degree on our food pantries. And so when Fresh Fire had an issue with their roof after the last really big snow, we were able to kind of reorganize things so that they could hold one of their food pantry days on our church, and we're only like a block away from them, you know, and things like that. So we're definitely like, yeah. So yes. Thanks.
Thank you.
Dave?
Yeah, I had a question. Maybe now it's a comment, but I think it deals with everything that has been asked to the gardeners, and that is, has anyone approached KBCC, Western Michigan, or K College about starting something? Because the University of Buffalo and the City of Buffalo have come together. You know, I mean, they're a public institution. They have a lot of faculty that are interested in this. I think the person who runs their program is out of the School of Social Work there. So, I mean, you know, obviously that is a good connection with this kind of thing. They deal with inequities. Obviously, they've got a large minority population in that city. So they use their community gardens for those kinds of things. And I'm just wondering if anyone has looked towards those institutions. Now, I'm not guaranteeing that they're going to be interested, because it depends on the faculty and what the faculty interests are and what the university's, you know, mission is. But it might be worth just a shot at those institutions and say, hey, listen, we've got this group that's starting to form. Would you be interested, or would you have a faculty member that might be interested in doing that? Because faculty oftentimes know where grant money might come from that is not, you know, common knowledge. So I just throw that out kind of as a comment. I think it fits into everything that people have been talking about.
Yeah, that is a great point. And I believe that Ruth is going to represent Hope for Creation at a meeting of a group called Common Ground Kalamazoo tomorrow. And Common Ground Kalamazoo is actually, I think kind of organized by the MSU Master Gardener Extension program, but also includes folks from the KVCC Food Innovation Center, the gardening work that they're doing there. And what we are hoping is, as sort of the faith-based branch of community congregational gardening, if you go to Common Ground Kalamazoo, they have a whole list of community gardens all through lots of neighborhoods in town, 30 or 40 different ones. And what we're trying to do today is really focus on the ones that are connected to faith-based organizations. But we're really excited about partnering with some of the other folks in town who are doing community gardening. So stay tuned. Great question. That's a great next step that this group is working on taking. So thank you for raising that. And Ruth, do you have your hand up? We have maybe 1 or 2 more minutes to.
I have a question, I guess. I guess I'm wondering if or how people think about mixing different kinds of gardenings, or not having like just a traditional plot, right? Because when I think Skyridge's property, for example, has lots of different nooks and crannies and contours, and the main expanse of grass we have right now is very close into Drake Road, which is an advantage and a disadvantage in terms of runoff from the road and stuff like that. So I guess maybe if you don't have a quick answer, I wonder if you could point toward resources that would help shape a mixed use of a space, with some vegetable gardening, some permaculture, some native plants, some meditation spaces, maybe some children's play spaces and things like that. And if you don't, that's fine. It's a huge question.
I would think that a master gardener would be a good source of information for that, knowing the length and breadth of gardening. That could be a good source of information.
Could also
I could offer up our master gardener, but I'd have to ask him first.
I'll keep that in mind. Yeah.
It can also take more than one master gardener, because I'm a master gardener, but I focus only on vegetable gardening. So I have no real knowledge of landscaping or flower gardens or anything like that.
It also might be helpful. There's the Illinois statewide Interfaith Power and Light is called Faith in Place. And I think that they are known for the variety of kinds of urban, congregational, different kinds of gardening and use of sacred outdoor space. So their website has some cool examples of gardens. I'm going to see if anybody has any last questions. I'm going to put up a couple slides if anyone wants to ask them, because I do want to show you a couple more bits of information as we close today. But if anybody does have a question that they've been wanting to quickly get into the mix, please do feel free to do that now. And interrupt me. And until then, I will just point out that this year's Faith Climate Action Week topic is actually sacred ground. The idea of cultivating connections between food, faith, and climate. So today's Green Team event for our community actually lines up with what will be happening all over the country. And I wanted to give people, if you weren't aware of this already, the opportunity to look into connecting with some of the resources that are available through Interfaith Power and Light, the national organization, in case your congregation wants to do something around Earth Day that sort of reinforces this idea of how we use the ground, how we connect with soil, and how food and faith are connected to climate. The one other thing I wanted to just point out, a couple of resources for you, is that there's lots of things also connecting to the earth and sacred ground coming up as part of Earth Week. The website is at the bottom of the left side of the screen if you want to check up into some of the things that are happening as part of Earth Week. But a lot of people are going to be watching the film Kiss the Ground, another way to really recognize the sacred connection that we have with the soil. And so I wanted to draw your attention to that. Also, if anybody here on the call today is interested in joining us, Hope for Creation is convening on a monthly basis. Folks who are doing congregational gardening or interested in congregational gardening with the hope of developing more relationships between folks who are doing this work. So our next convening is actually on Earth Day, April 22nd at 3:30, and you can reach us at Hope for Creation if you're interested in being part of that. And I also just wanted to point out that our goal is to have an actual physical tour of the gardens that you learned about today in June. So please do keep an eye on our Facebook page and our website as we get closer to being able to share information about that. We would love to have all of you take part in an actual tour of the gardens that we've highlighted today. Maybe there'll be recipes, maybe there'll be little trainings and opportunities to learn from each other that day. So that's just a next step for us at Hope for Creation. And with that, I want to first invite our 4 panelists, if they have any last words of wisdom they want to share with the group. We'd love to have you give a closing sentence if you have that, something you meant to say, or any last advice you want to give to the folks on the call today.
It's great to hear some of the different ways of joining faith with gardening. I was not aware of some of the other ways of joining those two together.
I think it's just a wonderful experience being with all sorts of people and learning and sharing.
This has been lots of fun. Thanks everybody for your contributions. And thank you, Joan.
I saw Marty had a hand up.
Thank you. I did see Kiss the Ground a couple times. I really was inspired by that movie. It's primarily about regenerative agriculture, but I know I sent Mark the link. There's an upcoming film. I don't know, who could I send it to, who could share it? I can't find it right now, on regenerative gardening, which would have more relevance to this particular group, you know, a much smaller scale than agriculture. Would I send something to you, Joan?
Yes, in fact, I'll send a follow-up email to everybody on the call, just giving you contact information for Hope for Creation. And then Marty, if you want to send that to me, I can disperse it to the rest of the group.
Okay.
Thank you. Good call. And Rochelle, did you have anything you wanted to add at the end, or?
Just thank you for having me. I always love talking about this. Also, I can't believe I forgot to say the word permaculture. I try to say the word permaculture because I love it and I'm trying to connect with other people. So that's all.
Great. Well, so on that note of connecting with other people, it's been wonderful to be with all of you today. Please do stay connected to this work. We're excited. We're excited to be an opportunity for people to bring faith and food together and to think about gardening as a sacred activity. So let's do stay in touch. I'll send an email to everyone who's on this today, and we would love to have you join us in whatever capacity makes sense for you in the coming weeks and months. So it's raining. Hooray! It's good for gardening. Have a wonderful evening. And again, thank you for being part of this today. Thanks especially to our 4 panelists. Wonderful job. We appreciate you. Have a great evening, everybody.